Cosmos 954 was a Soviet ocean surveillance satellite placed in low Earth orbit on September 18, 1977, and without planning returned home on January 24th, 1978. The satellite, because of its low orbit, required a nuclear reactor to power it. And the big question when the satellite returned to Earth on January 24th was, did the nuclear reactor, which was extremely hazardous to human and other life, survive reentry, or did it burn up on reentry? Thankfully, the 8% chance that the satellite would impact land, first of all, was ameliorated by the fact that it impacted in a fairly desolate area in the Northwest Territories. Russia immediately proclaimed everything burned up and they had no liability. Canada and the USA eventually concluded that the nuclear reactor burned up because they couldn't find it officially. There was a strong sense that there was no evidence to support these conclusions. They were primarily politically based conclusions. The Soviet reactor-powered satellite was a holy grail for intelligence services in the West, and it is quite conceivable that the satellite was surreptitiously recovered and examined by Western intelligence agencies. I don't know what the probability of that is, but judging by how much key evidence doesn't seem to have been examined, I think that the possibility of a covert recovery needs to be examined. James Oberg, a famous space writer, certainly commented on all the BS that came out of the Soviet Union at the time of the satellite's re-entry. In those days, nobody believed anything the Soviets said in the first place. We now know, for instance, that the commander of the program that launched the satellite and ran the satellite, the Rorschach program, Colonel Votintsev, wrote in his autobiography after his country burned up, the Soviet Union. He was now a Russian, and he simply wrote that when we knew the reactor and the satellite were going to return to Earth, we did some calculations and we realized that the satellite and the reactor would not burn up on re-entry. This became public knowledge many years after the satellite re-entered, and I have not yet seen any official acknowledgement of this, which supports basically the premise of this video, by the Canadian government or any other government. It just burned up was the standard statement that the Soviets provided publicly every time one of their satellites returned to Earth in a potentially catastrophic re-entry. The last orbit of Cosmos 954, as it returned to Earth and crashed in the Northwest Territories, was its 2060th orbit. There was a lot of water it could have impacted it in, but the satellite maintained its wings, so to speak, until it crossed north of Hawaii over the Queen Charlotte Islands, and as you can see, the yellow frame outlines the footprint, that search footprint that the Canadian forces and U.S. forces searched. The mystery surrounding the reentry of Cosmos 954 would be simply a mystery if it weren't for the fact that the implications are that there are 50 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium, highly enriched uranium, that returned to Earth. They're obviously in a lake or they would have been detected by now, and that this amount of weapons-grade uranium is sufficient to power 2 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs. This weapons-grade uranium is unsecured and it's easily accessible. Both citizens and the world would benefit from having the probability that this loose fissile material in fact exists in the Northwest Territories, have that probability reduced to 0. That would be a government action by Canadians who would revisit the incident that they initially covered with Operation Morningstar. I've tried for many years to interest government sources or government authorities on this without success, so I'm hanging up my spurs. The Yellowknife seismic array detected a mysterious signal that could have located the reactor on January 24th, about 1.5 minutes after the satellite officially impacted. None of this information is in the official record. There's much more, of course, and that will be the subject of the following videos. Here are some of the contacts that I've made over the years without achieving the slightest interest. I'm putting this public information up in the hopes that there will be a person or authority out there who will understand the message, who can read a scientific paper and not jump to conclusions, and initiate an investigation. As this slide points out, there's other imagery out there that could corroborate the statements I'm making, and this involves diplomatic interactions between Canada and Russia to obtain the blueprints for Cosmos 954 so that it can be accurately plotted with orbital debris reentry algorithms. I made a mistake. That was Operation Morning Light, not Operation Morning Star. Thank you.